All right, everyone, welcome back to the land of Chem. I am your host and the author. My name is Jeffrey Drum. Thank you all so much for joining me again.
All right, everyone, welcome back. And now the moment you all have been waiting for, a full breakdown and analysis of the data that was recently released by the Synthetic Aperture Radar CAFRA project team. Is there a huge city below the pyramids on the Giza plateau? And are there any hidden chambers inside of the central pyramid? Let's take a look and see exactly what they discovered. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you all so much for the support. I think that is it for today's intro, so without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, everyone, here we go with tonight's episode. Now, as I mentioned during Sunday Site Visit 97, the Land of Chem was represented during the live press release conference by my friend Thomas from Malta, who was sitting in the front row as the discoveries were presented, and he is responsible for my initial contact and introduction to the Synthetic Aperture Radar team. So first and foremost, thank you, Thomas, for coordinating this collaboration, and there may be some more exciting developments coming up in the near future. Now, before we get to the data, the images from the conference are already making the rounds all over social media with a lot of hype, and absolutely no one is giving this research a critical, in-depth analysis. So that is exactly what I will be doing today, starting with a review of the first research paper that was published by this team to establish a baseline for evaluation and comparison that will help you to better understand the new data that you are about to see. So let's start here with their first research paper that I covered back in episode 60, Breaking News, 2022 Great Pyramid Scans and Evidence for Hidden Chambers, where I expressed my excitement, enthusiasm, and skepticism for the research being presented in this paper, entitled Synthetic Aperture Radar Doppler Tomography Detects Undiscovered High-Resolution Internal Structures of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And I'll quote the abstract here that explains the basis of this synthetic aperture radar technology. Quote, "One problem with synthetic aperture radar is that given the limited penetrating effect of electromagnetic waves inside solids, the capability to image inside distributed targets is excluded. Under these circumstances, imaging activity is only given on the surface of distributed targets." This paper describes an imaging approach based on the investigation of micro movements on the Khnum-Khufu pyramid, usually generated by background seismic waves. The results obtained proved to be very promising, as, quote, high resolution, full 3D tomographic imaging of the pyramid's interior and subsurface was achieved. Khnum-Khufu becomes transparent like a crystal when observed in the micro movement domain. Based on this novelty, we have completely reconstructed internal objects, observing and measuring structures that have never been discovered before. The experimental results are estimated by processing series of synthetic aperture radar images from the second generation Italian Cosmo SkyMed satellite system, demonstrating the effectiveness of the proposed method. End quote from the abstract. Okay, so this synthetic aperture radar technology is a new method for imaging structures that relies on micro movement vibrations to detect internal features. And when I saw the new data that was released during the conference, I immediately reread this initial paper in the hope of improving my comprehension of the new scan images. And I began to notice several things that I pointed out back in episode 60. Again, being very excited, enthusiastic, but skeptical of what I was seeing. So in evaluating the following data and the potential viability of this SAR technology, we need to see three things. First, the ability of the SAR scans to detect and clearly show the known configuration of the structure. In other words, we should be able to see clear as day the chambers that we know exist. Second, the results of the scanning should be corroborated by other known and vetted internal imaging technologies like the muon scanning method. And third, the 3D modeling that is proposed by the team should be justified by what is shown in the actual scan data. So now, let's do a deep dive and see what this research shows. First, as clearly stated here in the abstract, the SAR scanning does not penetrate the structure. So what you are about to see are not actually images showing the inside of the pyramid. They are interpreting micro movements on the surface of the structure as potentially indicative of so-called hidden internal chambers. Next, I noticed several blatant errors mentioned in the paper regarding the basics of the Great Pyramid itself. For example, claiming that, quote, the Pyramid of Khnum-Khufu, which is also referred to as the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Pyramid of Cheops, is the most ancient and the greatest of the three major pyramids that are included in the necropolis of Giza. It is built of granite blocks, each weighing about 2.5 tons. And again here, the Pyramid of Khnum-Khufu is a monumental structure built mainly of granite blocks, which simply is not true. The Great Pyramid is almost completely made of limestone, with the exception of the King's Chamber, the antechamber, and the plug blocks. Now, I could attribute this to a simple mistranslation from Italian into English, but there is a clear, insignificant difference between the word limestone and the word granite that should have been recognized in this academic publication. And again, to claim that the Great Pyramid is, quote, built mainly of granite blocks is absolutely false. But for now, we'll just leave that alone and proceed with evaluating the actual scan data. All right, here is the first figure presented in the paper showing the SAR scan data on the right. And I'll point out a few things here. First, on the right here, you can see the edge of the Great Pyramid in the SAR scan image. And over here on the left, they have the scan image overlaid onto a schematic of the Great Pyramid. Okay, great. But what about this side? It isn't coming up on the scan at all. And there is nothing here on the left that matches the overlaid image. Second, look at all of this up here in the air. Anything that is not the base blue color is supposed to represent these, quote, micro movements that are indicative signature of internal components, but they're picking up the same vibrations from the air. Also, where are clear, quote, high resolution, end quote, images of the three chambers that we know exist? It should be showing the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the Queen's Chamber, and the Subterranean Chamber. And you will hear me reiterate this point several times during the episode that when I first started evaluating this paper several years ago, I was excited, I was enthusiastic, but there were a lot of things that triggered intense skepticism, specifically the extrapolation of the scan data into the 3D models that you will see in just a moment. And I'll let you be the judge of whether you think that these models are accurate and justified based on what the scans actually show. Next, here on the top left, you can see a depiction of the King's Chamber and what is conventionally known as the relieving chambers above, which for some reason in these papers they call the quote-unquote Z. And here on the right, this is the scan data of the area surrounding the king's chamber within the Great Pyramid. So over here is supposed to show us a, quote, transparent like a crystal, end quote, view inside of the structure using this SAR technology of the king's chamber over here. Here in the center, you can see these two things overlapped. And I will leave this SAR scan image for your interpretation as to whether or not you think that this is a, quote, transparent like a crystal image of the king's chamber. Next, here on the bottom left, we have the queen's chamber. Here on the right is the actual SAR scan data. And here in the center, these two things are overlapped. This one, a bit more convincing, with a general chamber shape over here. And you can see a little shaft leading out horizontally over here, which seems to correspond to the actual configuration of the queen's chamber. Okay, next. Another scan of the king's chamber and the, quote, so-called Z. And again, I don't know why they're choosing this nomenclature, but that is what they continue to call the relieving chambers as the Z in the new data report. Okay, here on the right, we can actually see some horizontal beam-like features that correspond to the red granite horizontal beams in the relieving chamber. And here, these two things are overlapped in this diagram. And I'll be coming back to this exact scan when we begin to evaluate the new data from the central pyramid. Okay, now, here is where we get to the real issue as I described before, the extrapolation of the actual scan data into the hypothetical 3D models. So here on the right, you can see the SAR scan data with tag number 1, tag number 4, and tag number 7 here, which they have built into the 3D model, with tag number 1 being this descending stair-like feature here, tag number 4 being this descending feature here, and tag number 7, this cross-beam feature here. So they are going from this on the right to this on the left. Also, where in this scan image is the existing configuration of known chambers? Again, we should see King's Chamber, Grand Gallery, Queen's Chamber, and Subterranean Chamber using their, quote, transparent like a crystal. Okay, let's see another example. Here, with tag 2, tag 5, and tag 9 on the right, becoming tag 2, tag 5, and tag 9 over here on the 3D model on the left. And a few more comparisons directly from their research paper, where the scan data on the right is extrapolated into a 3D model on the left. And again here, the scan data on the right being extrapolated into this 3D model on the left. Now, in episode 60, I did a more in-depth analysis, and I even offered some interpretation of these hypothetical features. For example, this structure here, perhaps operating as a semi-collapsible recoil spring, basically a shock absorber with a cantilever feature here at tag 7. And I'll return to the functionality again at the end of the video, and I'll put a link to episode 60 in the video description below so you can do a bit deeper dive into this issue. Now, this one here, looking from the top down with the scan data on the right being extrapolated into the 3D model on the left. They are showing the so-called Z relieving chamber here in the center. But where on this image is the Grand Gallery? Also, there is no acknowledgement of this huge red blob here. These, quote, false alarms, end quote, that you will see again in just a moment. And another one here showing tag 9 on the actual scan data, which becomes this cross beam feature in the 3D model over here. And I'll give you a moment just to look at what the actual scan data is showing and compare it to what they are proposing it represents in the 3D model. Okay, this one here is really telling with the scan data on the right showing the quote unquote Z relieving chamber, and then tag number 1 here supposedly becomes tag number 1, this huge feature over here. Tag number 19 on the scan becomes tag 19 over here on the model. Tag number 4 here in the scan becomes this huge feature in the 3D model over here, and so on. Another one here with tag 11 and 12 becoming these features shown in tag 11 and 12 on the 3D model. And I use this exact same phrase numerous times in episode 60 to express the disconnect I felt when evaluating this paper, which can best be described as a stretch of imagination at best. Again here, with tag number 13 on the actual scan being extrapolated as tag number 13 into the 3D model. With all this background noise on the actual scan data. All right, this one is a real problem. With the scan data here on the right, overlaid on top of a schematic of the actual known chambers, showing all of these readings over here, but not picking up any of the actual chambers. There is no activity here detecting the king's chamber. There is no activity here detecting the Grand Gallery. We do see some signature here for the queen's chamber, but none of the other shafts or major chambers are detected by this SAR technology. But they do take a giant leap and interpret tag 17 and tag 18 from the scan data over here and interpret them into their 3D model as tag number 17 and 18 over here. Unfortunately, this, again, to use the word disconnect, is a huge issue. How can we establish the ability of this technology to, quote, detect undiscovered, high-resolution internal structures, end quote? Again, this is a direct quote from the title of this research paper. They claim to be able to, quote, detect undiscovered, high-resolution internal structures, end quote. How can we establish this as being true when the scan data doesn't even show the chambers that we know exist? Again, no signature showing the king's chamber, absolutely nothing detecting the Grand Gallery or any of these other connecting shaft features. And I'm going to repeat that one more time because it merits more emphasis and will be directly applicable to the new data that you see at the end of the episode. How can this scan technology and data be accurate when it doesn't even really detect the chambers that we know exist? And let that sink in for a moment as we proceed, and for when you see the new scan data and their new 3D models. Now, this one over here on the right, showing some subterranean features, for example, tag 14, tag 15, and tag 16, represented in the 3D model as tag number 14, tag number 15, and tag number 16. But what the hell is all this over here that isn't even contained within the structure of the pyramid? This signature is supposed to be showing us hidden chambers, but it just continues out through the structure into the background air. And unfortunately, more of the same here, with this huge background signature just continuing out into the air and not even reliably detecting this edge of the pyramid. And once again, the SAR technology barely able to detect the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, or the subterranean chamber. We do see some signature here representing the area of the Queen's Chamber, but these other three major chambers are barely even detected. And in this one here, you can see a huge red signature, which they finally acknowledge as a, quote, false alarm. And at the end of the paper, they even go into the measurements of these proposed new features inside of the Great Pyramid in this elaborate diagram here and this one here. Now, there's another huge point to make here. Look at the positioning of the void chamber above the Grand Gallery that was also discovered by the Muon Scanning Project. This team is showing it way over here, not even close to the Grand Gallery. But the Muon Scanning team has it located precisely above the Grand Gallery. And the Muon Scanning team didn't detect any of the other stuff that is being reported by the SAR team. So once again, there is a huge disconnect between these two types of scanning technology. One that is trusted and vetted, the second, the SAR technology, being experimental at best. And if we are to believe that this SAR technology is viable for accurately detecting hidden chambers, it should be showing the exact same thing, which unfortunately is not the case. Okay, so now that I've established a baseline for interpretation of this scan data, let me once again express that I was excited, enthusiastic, but obviously skeptical of what was being reported by this team. But in the spirit of entertaining their research and in the hope that it could possibly be true, I provided some interpretation for the function of these proposed features. For example, in episode 138, discussing the function of the Great Pyramid Void, I explained how both the extraction chamber shaft that was detected by the SAR team and the system of, let's call it, piping surrounding the King's Chamber that they proposed in their SAR scan extrapolated models could have operated as a part of the Great Pyramid heat exchanger mechanism. And in episode 150, I explained how this scan from their initial paper may actually be showing the iron oxide permeated hill upon which the Great Pyramid was constructed. So to summarize, I think their initial research is fascinating, and there are absolutely some important things to take away from it. Am I skeptical about the translation of the scan data into these complex 3D models? Yes, and I think justifiably so. but I do think there is merit in this SAR technology. And this is a specific point that will become evident as we begin to evaluate their new data.
All right, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the video. And please remember to subscribe for more content if you're interested in the technology of ancient civilizations utilizing physics and chemistry and the function of the Egyptian pyramids and other ancient structures from around the world. If you want to help support the channel, you can pick up a copy of the Land of Chem book and grab some merch at thelandofchem.com and for access to exclusive content. Subscribe to the members-only channel now with 19 massive research episodes revealing some of my most groundbreaking discoveries thus far. Links to everything in the video description below. Thank you all so much for the support. Now, back to the video.
All right, now, let's jump into the highly anticipated new data that was revealed on March 15th and 16th, detailing the discovery of what they call, quote, a huge city, end quote, below the Giza pyramids. And remember my statement, as applied to their first paper, that this SAR technology should, one, be able to detect and clearly show the existing configuration of chambers. Two, the scan data should be corroborated by vetted technology like the muon scanning method. And third, the 3D models should be justified based on the actual scan data. And I'm going to read through this whole press release verbatim so you can assess it for yourself. And I'll begin quoting here. This abstract summarizes the key points of our research, which aimed to clarify the possible hidden structures inside the second pyramid of the Giza plateau, known as the Khafra pyramid. This research was conducted using non-invasive techniques based on publicly available synthetic aperture radar data provided as open source by Capella Space and Umbra. Our study was inspired by previous research conducted, described, and published by Filippo Biondi and Corrado Malanga. That research focused on analyzing the internal structures of the Pyramid of Khafra, otherwise known as the Great Pyramid, led to the publication of a book and a scientific paper. It revealed numerous internal structures within the first pyramid of the Giza Plateau, uncovering the presence of rooms and corridors both above and below ground level. This research utilized synthetic aperture radar technology, which, for the first time, employed innovative and original software developed by Filippo Biondi. This software allowed the transformation of the radar electromagnetic signal into phononic information, capable of detecting millimetric displacements of vibrating structures inside the analyzed structure that had remained completely invisible until then. The tomographic images obtained through this methodology led to the construction of a model of the Pyramid of Khufu, of which we present 4 reconstructions below. The second step. In the second phase of our research, we decided to focus the radar analysis on the second most important pyramid of the Giza Plateau, the Pyramid of Khafra. The pyramid proved a wealth of data regarding previously unknown internal structures. The tomographic images obtained from the satellite data were processed immediately, highlighting the presence of 5 structures located at the center of the pyramid above Belzoni's chamber, which contains a presumed sarcophagus mistakenly believed to be the pharaoh's tomb. End quote. Okay, certainly looks interesting. Now, let's take a close look and examine each scan image. Starting here. And I will quote the rest of this here. These structures share the same shape as the so-called Z structure found inside the Pyramid of Khufu, above the ceiling of the so-called pharaoh or king's chamber. The 5 Zs appear to be connected by geometric pathways, and alongside these structures, additional secondary structures are visible from various satellite angles, as shown in some of the tomographic images below. The analysis of this data, obtained using entirely non-invasive techniques, are briefly summarized below. These findings allowed us to create a 3D model of the entire complex. The examination of dozens of tomographic images obtained from different angles using Capella space and Umbra radars enabled the 3D reconstruction of most objects inside the Pyramid of Khafra. Below, we present some images from our 3D analysis. The first actual scan image that you can see here, and another one here stating analysis of the structures above Belzoni's chamber. I'll come to that again in just a moment. Intensely colored spots can be observed, appearing in all tomographic images taken from different angles, corresponding to internal artificial structures. Okay, now, show me where on this scan are the chambers that we know exist. There should be a primary chamber, a lower chamber, 2 descending shafts, and a connecting shaft linking the primary and lower chamber system. Where are these known chambers on these scan images? And why can't this technology accurately detect what we know is there? And here is a higher resolution image of the actual scan data. Again, where on this scan are the chambers that we know exist? They should be, quote, transparent like a crystal, end quote. And another one here showing these newly discovered structures located above the Belzoni chamber. This one here certainly looks like some horizontal layered features. Okay, cool. But once again, where are the chambers that we know exist? Moving on. And I'll resume quoting again here. This image showing, quote, the improvement of the signal to noise ratio, revealing the internal structure of the 5 Zs, consisting of 5 horizontal levels and a sloping roof. This one down here, the first 3D model, tomography with another cross-sectional line showing the presence of vertical structures located. Okay, this one here, supposed to be a, quote, improved signal to noise ratio, end quote, giving us an even clearer picture of these new structures, which I hate to beat a dead horse, but once again, where in this scan are the chambers that we know exist? Where are the inlet shafts? Where are the connecting shafts? I see absolutely nothing in this scan that even remotely resembles the existing configuration of the internal chamber system. And they are going from this, the actual scan data, to this. And when I first saw this data and the 3D models for the first time a week ago, I was speaking to Alexa and my initial reaction was twofold. And pardon my French, but quote, what the fuck is this? And second, you have got to be kidding me, end quote. There is absolutely no way that I can see a justifiable extrapolation from this scan data into this 3D model. Okay, now let's take a look at these features that they are showing below the pyramid. And I'll quote here, the 8 cylindrical structures identified in our tomographic images appear as vertical wells, hollow inside, surrounded by descending spiral pathways, shown in these scan images here. Take a look at the actual scan image before we look at their interpreted, extrapolated 3D model. And I'll quote again here. As observed in the 3D model, below the ground level of the main structure, vertically aligned cylindrical structures extend for hundreds of meters below the Giza plateau. Notably, 8 of these structures arranged in 2 parallel rows from north to south, descend to a depth of 648 meters, merging into 2 large cubic structures measuring approximately 80 meters per side. These features are illustrated in the tomographic images and 3D models presented below. The 8 cylindrical structures identified in our tomographic images appear as vertical wells, hollow inside, surrounded by descending spiral pathways. Third step, the next phase involved analyzing the tomographic data to determine the full extent of the underground structures beneath the Giza plateau. The tomographic images clearly reveal that structures exist beneath the plateau, extending below the pyramids of Khafra, Khufu, and Menkaura for approximately 2 kilometers beneath ground zero. As seen in the tomographic data, which places the pyramid of Khafra at the center, with Khufu's shadow on the right and Menkaura in the upper left, these structures form a vast area of non-natural constructions following complex geometries. In the 4th step of our investigation, the structures will be analyzed further with the possibility of excavation to verify the artificial natures of the structures we have identified. So once again, here is the actual scan images. This one here on the top left, supposedly revealing this cube-like formation. And these here showing the 8 wells with the descending spiral pathways. So they are going from this to this. And then this. And the phrase I used to describe their first models, quote, a stretch of the imagination, seems applicable once again. And here are some of the 3D models that they have created based on this scan data, showing these, what I would call spring-like formations below the king's chamber and these relieving chamber type structures that they refer to as the Z. So how did they model these 3D Z-type structures inside of the central pyramid, and how did they get the idea that these things actually exist? So remember this scan from the first paper showing these horizontal beam-type features that were detected in the relieving chamber area around the king's chamber? These new scans are picking up something similar inside of the central pyramid. Now, as always, I have some ideas about the functionality of these new features. For example, the subterranean features that they describe as hollow wells with spiral staircases, not staircases at all, but perhaps operating like a spring or a shock absorber mechanism, very similar to the spring and cantilever system that I described in the Great Pyramid. And I know I'm being critical about all of this, but I do see some serious issues with this technology. Mainly, its inability to detect the known chambers, which, once again, I don't see in this image at all. Now, I am still excited and enthusiastic about the potential, and in an upcoming episode, I will propose some hypothetical functions for all of these systems. Okay, now, this is a previously released SAR scan image from Corrado Malanga, showing these comb-like features below the central pyramid, which he originally interpreted into a 3D model that you can see here, with this structure running right down the center of the central pyramid. But for some reason, in the new model, they have moved it completely over to the west side, now featuring some tank-like chambers here and here that connect into what appear to me to be a system of distribution pipes. So I definitely like the idea about speculating on the potential function of these new systems. But how they go from this to this is simply beyond me. And from what I've seen so far on social media, everyone is all caught up in the hype on the 3D models. But absolutely no one is paying any attention whatsoever to what the actual scans show. Again, reflecting zero detection of the known chamber configuration. Not to mention, the central pyramid was also scanned with muon technology in this exact same area above the Belzoni chamber, and they found absolutely nothing. To reiterate point number 2, this novel SAR technology should be corroborated by vetting scanning technology like the muon method, and these two methods showing the same thing. Unfortunately, once again, that is not the case. All right, now, on to my predictions about what would be discovered in this SAR scanning. First, regarding the distribution chamber and shaft system located below the extraction chamber, which certainly looks similar to this pipe network feature that they have over here, but with the addition of a collection tank here and here that is now reflected on my diagram here. So now, please keep in mind that the data released by the team thus far is just the preliminary report, and there is supposed to be a full paper being published soon. So this will be an ongoing series of evaluating their research as it comes out. But just looking at this here, I don't think there is any way to justify the extrapolation of the actual scan data into this. So at this point, it is all completely speculation for entertainment purposes. Okay, so now on to the grand finale, the big reveal, the greatest discovery in the history of pyramid research ever, undeniable proof of a, quote, huge city, end quote, below the Giza plateau, and 1 kilometer deep shafts leading to the halls of Amenti. Are you ready? Let's go. Well, this is what they brought to the table. And I'll read the description here so you can understand what this is supposed to be showing. Quote, panoramic, south to north view of the Giza plateau with a tomographic line cutting through the Khafra structure at approximately half its height. The darker central line corresponds to the edges of the Khafra pyramid, the northeast and southwest, which have low vibrational content and therefore appear darker. The various bright spots beneath the pyramids represent artificial structures located approximately 2 kilometers below the Giza plateau. So first, where on this image do you see the pyramids? According to their description, Menkaura should be somewhere here, Khafra should be somewhere here, and Khufu should be somewhere here. They're supposed to be here, according to the SAR team, and this dark central line isn't a 1 kilometer deep shaft, according to this description. It has something to do with the edge of the central pyramid. Okay, now, where is the ground level? They made all this hype about a, quote, huge city, end quote, and these, quote, 1 kilometer deep shafts, end quote, with all the pyramids providing an access point into the halls of Amenti. And they scheduled an international press conference to shock the archaeological community across the world. I expected them to come locked and loaded with some conclusive evidence, and this is what they showed up with. In my opinion, this has absolutely nothing to do with an underground city, but it is showing us a glimpse of the subterranean hydrothermal cave and tunnel network that is a part of the ancient seafloor bedrock of the Giza Plateau that I have proposed over the last several episodes, as you can see here. And I'm going to show a series of images with no context starting now. And you may be saying to yourself, Jeff, Those are pictures from deep inside the Tomb of the Birds. And these features look exactly like what you have been showing us on the Giza Plateau. Oh my God, people have been down inside all of the tunnels and caves below Giza. And this is the exact same thing that you have been showing us all over the plateau in Sunday site visits. Jeff, how did you find these exclusive archaeological investigation images from the subterranean system below Giza? Well, none of this is from Giza. These are hypogenic iron ore caves from Austria. And in this article, they discuss hypogenic speleogenesis, which is a fancy term that means cave formation coming from underground, specifically related to, drum roll, sulfuric acid speleogenesis, which literally means cave formation from, wait for it, sulfuric acid. Any of this sound familiar? And here are a few images from last week's Sunday Site Visit 97, showing some of the tunnel features near the surface of the Giza Plateau here on the left, and inside the Tomb of the Birds on the right, which look exactly like this. A hypogenic iron ore cave, coming from this article here, hypogenic cave patterns in iron ore caves. Mentioning specifically here the speleogenesis in iron ore caves, stating here in the introduction, quote, caves and small voids in iron-rich rocks have been reported in Brazilian geological literature since the 19th century, but only recently due to the expansion of iron mines. Iron ore mining activities led directly to the discovery of this cave system. Seems like exactly what I've been discussing for the past 5 years now. They also say here, the existence of substantial voids at great depths in iron areas is well established by numerous proprietary borehole logs from iron exploration studies. Porosity generation and thus speleogenesis may start at an unknown depth in the order of several hundred meters below the present surface. And I've extensively described these systems as iron ore caves and tunnels in all of my previous research. And these hypogenic caves can form in a variety of chamber-like configurations, as you can see here, as individual chambers, here as long single-story network mazes, and even as multi-level features here, which could certainly appear using this vague at best synthetic aperture radar scanning technology, and to someone that already has an ulterior motive looking for the quote halls of Amenti, these caves, naturally occurring formations, could certainly appear as a city. This is not a city. It is the iron ore cave system below the Giza Plateau, which I have extensively documented with on-site evidence, which just so happens to be directly connected to H2S gas, hydrogen sulfide. So on the Giza Plateau, we not only have an abundant supply of metal ore that contains not only iron, but precious metals like gold and silver, but we also have a natural supply of sulfur-bearing gas, a gas that can be directly converted into sulfuric acid. And for now, I'll leave it with this, as this new synthetic aperture radar technology data does have merit, as I've said before, and it has opened a door for a whole new chapter for understanding the Giza Plateau system, not as the halls of Amenti or some subterranean city system, but exactly as I have been saying since day one, that it is an industrial chemical manufacturing and metal ore mining and processing site. and I've said this over and over, that the location of the Giza plateau was intentionally selected as it featured all of the natural resources that were required to fuel and sustain this industrial operation. And yes, of course, I will continue analyzing any new data that is released by the SAR team. And this is just the beginning of understanding the true capabilities of the Giza Plateau industrial system. So to summarize, am I excited about this data? Yes. Am I enthusiastic about the data? Yes. Am I skeptical about the data? Also yes. Do I think they discovered 5 king's chambers sitting on top of a giant subterranean spring coil system below the central pyramid? The jury is still out on that one. Do I think they discovered the halls of Amenti below the Giza Plateau? Absolutely not. Do I think there is merit to this technology as a non-invasive imaging technique? Possibly, but it will never be taken seriously if it can't reliably detect the chambers that we actually know are there, which is a huge issue with all of their actual scan data, and it was the primary reason why their first paper was essentially ignored. So, we will just have to wait and see what comes out next from the SAR team, and I'll have an episode coming out soon presenting some functional interpretation of all of the new features proposed in their 3D models. Hate to burst your bubble, but please subscribe. Stay tuned. All right, everyone, that is it for today's video. This was episode 153, a full analysis of the SAR scan data. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and in the next episode in the series, we return to the Giza Plateau for Sunday Site Visit 98 for an on-site investigation of some of the anomalous features proposed in today's video. This is an episode you do not want to miss, so if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Land of Chem here on YouTube. Remember to click the little notification bell so you don't miss out on the new episodes that premiere twice per week. Please like, comment, share, and stay tuned. If you want to help support the channel, check out the Land of Chem members only channel and thelandofchem.com, both linked in the video description below. If you want to follow me on Instagram or on X, my handle is @thelandofchem. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you all so much for the support. I think that is it for today's episode, so I will see you next time. Yo, are you still watching this? Please subscribe to the Land of Chem here on YouTube and click that little notification button. New videos coming out every single week. And check out this other episode. Come on, do it. Do it now.